welcome everybody. I just want to introduce myself first. My name is John Lott. I am one of the professors at Bellevue College in the Neurodiagnostic technology program. And we're one of the healthcare career fields that's usually not heard about, right? So most of my students, current students and students over the past years have often been students who were looking into other healthcare fields at Bellevue College or another college in the area, and they stumbled across our program somehow, either searching the website or hearing about it from a different program. And we're just not as popular as nursing or, like, let's say, x-ray techs. So I'm glad to see a bunch of y'all here who, at least there'll be at least a dozen more people in the world who know what neurodiagnostic technology is. So that means my title would be, and if I was working in the hospital, as a neurodiagnostic technologist, which is a mouthful, right? It's a big, long word. And usually if somebody asks what you do and you tell them that, they just say, wow, you must be smart, right? Because the first part of the word is neuro. And so they just assume you're smart. And so I'm down with that for sure, right? If everybody thinks I'm smart, as soon as the word neuro comes out, I'm cool with that, right? But the truth is that the program itself it's a 2-year associate degree program. This is not a PhD in neurophysiology, right? This is a technologist level training, and they're going to learn about, like, what techs do today, and just a little bit about the program in general. So, and this is what I got for y'all. So what is neurodiagnostic technology, and kind of what the day in the life of a neurodiagnostic technologist looks like, some areas that techs can specialize in, what the program looks like at Bellevue College, and the demands of the program. So first, I want to start off with saying we do an array of different types of tests on patients. It's all diagnostic testing to help physicians diagnose different disorders. Much like an x-ray tech takes a picture of your bones to see if the bone is broken, we do different types of tests to see if there's something neurologically going on. And one of the main tests we do is called an EEG, or electroencephalogram. And it's where we record brain waves. And the major reason we do it is for people to see if people are having seizures. And for students who are interested in the program, they have an information session that you have to go to. And the first question I always ask is, what does a seizure look like? And most people's answer is something like this, right? That's what they've seen on TV, in the movies. It's a patient who falls over on the ground, their body's convulsing, they might be frothing at the mouth, and they're unconscious, right? And they jerk around, and it looks very dire and emergent, and it is. They need care, but that is only one kind of seizure, and it gets the most attention because it's the most dramatic looking. There are seizures that look like this, where a patient appears to be just staring off into space, and they don't have any movements whatsoever, but they are unconscious during this event. And it can last 5 seconds or it can last a couple minutes. But there are patients with this type of seizure who have 30, 40 seizures a day where they go unconscious, like they're put on pause. And it usually happens in kids, and it's very hard to diagnose because it looks like they're just not paying attention, right? So teachers calling their name over and over, they're not responding. It looks like they have some attention problem, but they're really having seizures. There's also another type of seizure where a patient appears to be really confused. They usually get up and are kind of walking and pacing, and they look really confused, and they can't respond verbally to you. And they're having a seizure, which they won't remember once it's over. A seizure can be as little as a finger twitching. Right? A seizure is really when the neurons that are firing in your brain are misfiring. The way I like to think about it is if you had a short in the wiring going to the light in your room, it might be flickering, it might turn off. And imagine that short happening in your brain. And sometimes that short spreads throughout the whole brain and causes what we call a generalized seizure that makes the patient fall on the ground, convulse, and sometimes it just affects a certain part of the brain. So if it stays localized to one piece of the brain, it will only have effects on whatever that part of the brain is controlling in your body. So if I had a seizure in a tiny little spot in my brain, like let's say here, and that controlled my left, first finger, then it might just cause a twitch in this finger. And that's the only thing. But then it can spread. It can spread throughout the muscle groups, or it can spread to the whole body. Now, one of the first things students learn when coming to this program is anatomy. And we are talking about anatomy specific to the nervous system. And so one of the very first days, students are learning the cranial nerves, right? And if you get into healthcare and they're going to school, oftentimes there's many different things to memorize, and you'll end up being given acronyms by your teachers to help you remember. And so the one I came up with, there are 12 cranial nerves, and the acronym I came up with is OOO, to try and face video games vividly at home. And so those translate over to these 12 cranial nerves. And here's a picture of where they are in the head. The next thing is this guy, and I don't know if anybody's ever seen Homunculus Man, but what Homunculus Man is a representation of kind of the evolution of the brain in terms of how much of it is distributed to different areas. And we're talking about motor and sensory for the most part here, right? So there's motor and sensory strips in the brain that help us actually do stuff or feel stuff. And this is a representation of how much of those sensory and motor strip is devoted to different areas of the brain. And so you can see the hands are huge here, right? Because our hands and their sensory and motor aspects are better than almost anywhere on the body, right? Like we can touch something with our finger and we can not only, we can tell texture, temperature, um, all sorts of stuff about it just from touching it. Like we can't do with our knee, for instance, right? And our face as well. Our face is full with taking care of a lot of the senses, taste and smell and stuff like that. And so here, this shows how it's laid out on the brain. This is a slice of the brain cut out showing where those different body parts are represented on the brain. All right. So what is neurodiagnostic technology? And, I just mentioned as a comparison to X-ray, and I do that often because most people can easily have a picture of what like an X-ray tech may do. And we're similar to them in the way that we're doing diagnostic studies. It's just that ours are done much differently. And the best description of it is right here saying, we are recording electrical activity of the brain and nervous system. And we do the brain mostly, but we can also record stuff in the nerves of your extremities, of your arms and legs. For like, let's say somebody who has a problem with feeling somewhere in their feet, hands, we can test nerves to see if something may be wrong with them. So a day in the life of a neurodiagnostic tech is usually in either a neurology clinic or a neurophysiology lab. And the testing can take a while. So you can see an example of a patient here in the picture who's hooked up to EEG electrodes. And so they have wires all over their head, and that can take a while to prep the patient for. So where these wires go are measured locations. So we have a tape measure and a grease pencil that we measure the patient's head and make marks all over it so that we know where to put the wires. So they are recording over specific areas of the brain. And once they're hooked up, then we're going to record for a specific amount of time. The minimum would be 20 to 30 minutes, but some patients get recorded much longer, just depending on what the doctor orders. And so our main job is doing studies throughout the day. We do a lot of outpatients. So that's patients just coming in for a scheduled appointment to get one of the tests. And then we also do inpatients where we go to the room in the hospital and do the testing there. And next, I'm going to talk about some different areas that techs can specialize in. And the first one being the EEG that I've kind of been talking about a little bit, right? So you have wires all over the scalp, which records brain electrical activity, right? And so there's kind of a little example on the screen there in the cartoon version there of a bunch of squiggly looking lines coming from the brain that are representing the electrical activity. And so in the program you learn, in a normal person, there would be expected brain waves to happen, and they're different in different parts of the brain. So the front part of the brain, there's certain waves we expect to see. In the back part of the brain, there's different waves we expect to see. The brain waves change during sleep, and there are 5 stages of sleep, and they all have their own brain waves that go with them. And then they also change if you're having a seizure. So there are specific wave patterns that happen during different types of seizures, which is one of the main reasons people get EEGs. EEGs can also be done after traumatic brain injuries, and that could be from like a car wreck or getting hit in the head or a concussion, or it could be after a patient has a stroke. And the stroke just basically means blood supply has been cut off to a portion of the brain for a certain period of time, and that can cause brain damage. And we can evaluate that brain damage with an EEG, seeing how much effect it's had on the electrical activity of the brain. And for certain patients, this may be just doing the 20 to 30 minute EEG. And let's say it's a stroke patient who just had a stroke, got brought to the ER and got admitted to the hospital. They may be hooked up to the EEG and left on for a few days so we can monitor their brain activity and see if it's how it's progressing, which if it's going up or down. Let's see, the next area is sleep studies, is one of our specialties. And it involves putting wires on the patient's head as well, because we can tell sleep stages from that, like I mentioned. But it also involves putting monitors on other parts of the body. We put belts around the patient's chest and abdomen to monitor respiratory movements. And we put airflow monitors in front of their mouth and nose, and we can monitor air coming in and out of their mouth. And also wires on their legs and possible arms. If they have a limb movement disorder during sleep, patients who kick a lot during the sleep, we can monitor the kicks. We can monitor breathing during sleep, and then we can just monitor their actual brain sleeping and see how well they're sleeping. One of the main reasons patients get sleep studies is sleep apnea, where they stop breathing while they're sleeping. But there's also other sleep disorders such as narcolepsy, REM behavior disorder, sleepwalking. All right, the next one is nerve conduction velocity studies. And I've got a picture up here of one of the nerve conduction velocity studies we do. And you can see there that there's some wires like on the base of the patient's thumb. And those are the wires where we're going to be recording from. And then the little probe thing that's being held there against the skin is the stimulator. So it actually introduces an electrical current to the patient, and they're trying to hit a specific nerve there, right? So they're just pushing it against the patient's skin and pushing the little stimulate button, and it introduces an electrical current to the nerve, and then we can record it picking up at the thumb. And so on the right side, it shows an example of what that may look like, the waveform that we get on the screen. So we see this big wave go up, and from that wave, we can tell how fast it moved. You know, from here to the thumb, we can see how fast it went, and actually how much of it went. By the height of the wave tells us how much of the signal got through. So patients with a wrist, like if you ever heard of carpal tunnel syndrome, they would have an increased latency, which means it's going slower, and the amplitude or the strength of the signals lower. So it can cause numbness and tingling in their hand. And so this can happen through the elbow, through the shoulder, the hips, knees, and ankles as well. So we do a lot of, these tests are done a lot of going through joints and testing nerve conduction velocity or speed going through different areas. Basically, anywhere we can get that probe close to a nerve to shock it, we can do a test, which is mostly on the arms and legs. There's really the trunk of the patient, there's really no external nerves here that you can test on. All right, evoked potential is another specialty of ours, and it's similar to nerve conduction studies in a way that we're providing a stimulus and measuring the response. This one's just a little more complicated, and there's many types of evoked potentials, but the one I got pictured here is called an auditory evoked potential. And so it's done with these headphones on the patient, and the headphones making repetitive clicks or sounds in one ear at a time. And we're recording the response of the brain to that. So we can see it going through the auditory pathway, and you can see a picture of the wave there. And the waves are all numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they are expected to be at certain time frames. So you can see we could measure the actual time here. And the time here for like wave 1 is about 2 milliseconds, right? So this is very fast, right? 2 milliseconds, and there's 1,000 milliseconds in every second. The whole waveform going through the whole auditory process. So from the click happening to it getting through the auditory pathway to the brain, it takes about 9 milliseconds. And when we do visual, we have a visual one too, where we do a visual stimulus, which can be flashing lights. And then we do a sensory one too, where we do a electrical stimulus like I was showing you on the last slide, and measure the response going all the way to the brain. And then we have long-term monitoring, which is the EEGs I was telling you all about before. A bunch of wires on the head, hooked up, and like I said, the normal length of a study is 20 to 30 minutes, but can be longer. Kids are usually done for 90 minutes, and that's all outpatient stuff. Now, some patients need to be hooked up for a long time, and when I say a long time, I'm talking about 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, or even longer. There's really no limit to how long a patient can be hooked up. The main reason for getting hooked up for a long time is sometimes if, let's say you had an event, right, where they thought it might be a seizure, whatever happened, you fell down, you jerked around a little bit, or something else happened where they thought you might be having a seizure, and you go get an EEG and you get the 20 to 30 minute recording, you go home and they don't find anything on it, right? That doesn't mean that you don't have seizures. It just means nothing showed up during that 20 to 30 minutes. So there are different things they can do from that point. If the physician really thinks you're having seizures, then often one of the next steps is getting a long-term EEG, where you get recorded for a lot longer. And so sometimes these are done at home, and you can get hooked up at the hospital and then go home with all the wires and a little box where it hooked up to, and it's recording everything. And then you go back to the hospital the next day and turn it in. And there are also companies that come and hook you up in your home, and you never have to go to the hospital. And then there's also times where the patient does it in the hospital, and they stay in the hospital for like a week as an inpatient, getting recorded the whole time. And the right picture here is an example of that, with there's a tech and a doctor in a monitoring room where they're watching several patients in many rooms. And so the big hospitals in this area, like Swedish Cherry Hill, UW Medical Center, Harborview, Seattle Children's, they all have specific inpatient units dedicated to this monitoring, where patients check in and they get hooked up and they stay there for several days hooked up to an EEG.
John, did you want to answer questions at the end or no?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I just seen it. Yeah, I'll answer the question. It'll be easier than that way.
At the end?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's see. And then the one that many students find the most exciting specialty, intraoperative monitoring. And so this is completely different than the other specialties of ours. All the specialties I just talked about have to do with diagnostic studies. So that is patients coming in to get a test to help diagnose something going on with them. Intraoperative monitoring is not to diagnose anything. So the best example I can give you of intraoperative monitoring is, let's say a patient has scoliosis, and that's where their spine, the curves in their spine are not right, and their spine is curving way too much. And usually at some point, kids who have this will go get surgery to help straighten the spine and prevent any more curves. And during this procedure, since they're manipulating the spine, well, the spinal cord is inside that. And if they start squishing on the spinal cord or pinching it off, they could have damage done. And the patient could wake up and be like, I can't feel my legs, right? And at that point, it's a little too late, right? So what we can do is hook up wires and our devices, and we can monitor nerve function going up and down the spine while the patient is unconscious. And so while they're messing with the spine, we can monitor spinal cord function and then tell the surgeon if we're losing signal or there's any changes or anything like that. So the spinal cord is a big one that's commonly done in the OR. We can also monitor facial nerves if they're having facial surgery to make sure that they don't mess up any facial nerves and end up having drooping of one side of the face because they accidentally, messed with one of the facial nerves that helps with muscle control of the face. Auditory. So if they're doing brain tumors and it's in the area of the auditory nerve, we can monitor auditory nerve function while they're unconscious and help make sure that they don't accidentally mess with the auditory nerve. And so the reason number one, I would say a lot of students are interested in it is it pays more. So money's a good motivator. But it can also be a little more exciting, it seems, right? Being in the OR. I would have to say it's mostly boring though. So if you see the picture on the right there is an example of a tech sitting in the corner looking at their screen with the squiggly lines, and the other side of the room is where the surgery is going on. And most of the time, nothing's going on. You're just staring at your squiggly lines and monitoring it. And it's only if something goes wrong that it gets all exciting, intense, and stressful. So it's the one thing I warn students about when they, a lot of students get really excited about this when they hear this field, is if you got into if you're getting into patient care because you like being around patients, then you need to know that this part of our field is you're not going to be talking to any conscious patients. the patients are already unconscious when they're wheeled into the OR. And so you never get to deal with patients one-on-one while they're awake. So it's definitely different. All right, and then real quick, this is the Bellevue College NDT program. It's an AA degree, 2 full years, which is the 2 3/4 years with the summer quarter in between the 2 years. KEP is who we're accredited by, and that's just what allows all our students to take, that makes them eligible for the National Registry upon graduation. And this could very well just say demands of the healthcare field and not just demands of the neurodiagnostic program. This is something to think about, I would say, with all healthcare. If you're working in healthcare, walk and stand for long periods of time, right? However long your shift is, you could be on your feet for most of it, right? Going from different patient rooms, doing different testing. It's not a sit down type of job most of the time. Good vision and hearing, or correctable to good. I mean, you got glasses, that's fine, right? And that's just because we're reading patient medical charts. We've got to be able to see our screen. We've got to be able to communicate with patients. So we've got to be able to hear them, which also in tune goes with excellent verbal and written communication skills, because we actually do reports that go with all our studies, and that gets put in patients' medical records. So the grammar and stuff has got to be there. And although like lifting and moving patients isn't a primary part of our job, that's more in the nursing side. Being in healthcare, you may need to assist. If I'm in the room, in an inpatient room with a patient doing an EEG and the patient needs to be moved, well, I'm there and I'm going to be helping. And then able to work under stress. So my best examples of this, and I've got a couple here, right, is I mentioned a little bit about it taking a little time to hook up a patient, like mark all over their head and put these wires all over. And that, after a student gets really good at it in their first year in the program, they can do it in about 30 minutes. That's after a lot of practice. Now, when I say 30 minutes, I'm talking about usually an adult who's cooperative. Now, imagine a 2-year-old needing this study, and the 2-year-old is crying and screaming the whole time and fighting you. And it takes you an hour to put all the wires on. And then right when you're done and you turn around really quick to get your computer up and running, and you just, you didn't pay attention to the patient for a minute and they ripped all the wires off. Because once these wires are on, it doesn't take much for them to grab them and pull them all off. So anybody who gets in this field, that day is going to happen. Sooner or later, that day is going to happen where you have the patient that tests your patients. And then while most days are full of outpatients who walk into the clinic and they get, they have an outpatient appointment, they walk in, you talk to them, you do the test. You can feel like you're helping in some way, whether you helped diagnose what they got to help get treated, or you ruled out a disorder and that moves them on to get diagnosed somewhere else. You can feel very helpful. But there are times when we get called to run what they call brain death studies on patients. And so like my first one, I'll never forget. It was a young lady who was 19 or 20. So I get called up to her room to do a study. She's an inpatient in the ICU to do a brain death study. And this is basically to help prove brain death and help the family make a decision on pulling the plug. Because when it's a hard decision to make for a family, right? Because in their eyes, their loved one is laying there, and even though they're being kept alive by life support, there can be a lot of hope. And so we do a brain death study to help prove there's absolutely no brain activity happening. And brain death is a whole nother arena that we get into, but there has been 0 patients ever to come alive from brain death, 0. So it's what we do is pretty certain when we prove brain death. All right, now that is the last slide here, and I am open for questions. I do see there's one already written here. Do people ever have seizures while being tested or anything? They do have seizures while being tested. Now, like I said, our typical outpatient study is 20 to 30 minutes long. So if somebody has seizures on occasion, it becomes unlikely that they're just going to happen to have one during that 20 to 30 minutes, right? Now, we do a few things to help, though. And we don't necessarily want them to have seizures, but there are a few things we can do to help abnormal activity happening. So seizure activity can be seen in the brain, not just during a seizure. If they're actually having a seizure, then yes, the brain will be full of seizure waves. But somebody who has seizures, in between seizures, they'll actually have random little seizure waves happening here and there. They can just be really hard to find buried in all this other brain activity. So we do some things. We do hyperventilation. That can help bring out seizure waves in somebody who has seizures. It will not do anything to a normal patient. We also do a flashing light. I don't know if you've ever seen at the beginning of movies or video games and stuff where they say, warning, if you have seizures or epilepsy, this includes flashing stuff. It's because flashing lights can trigger seizure activity in some patients. And we also do sleep deprivation. That can cause seizures. So in adults, we'll actually have them stay up 24 hours. And this isn't for every time, but if they had a normal EEG, but we still think something might be wrong, we might order a second EEG where they're sleep deprived, meaning they stay up for 24 hours and they come in and get an EEG with no sleep. And that it kind of puts their brain under stress, and it can really bring out abnormal stuff.
You have 5 minutes, John.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions? And you can write it in the chat or anything. My info is on the screen if you have any questions about the neurodiagnostic program at Bellevue. Particularly, I was happy to be here. Is it tough to study? I would say it is not as tough as it seems with a name that starts with neurodiagnostic. It sounds really complicated. And the other, like nuclear medicine and ultrasound and x-ray, are much harder as far as the classes they have to take than ours. Ours, the very first class, the Neuro A and P, is probably the hardest class. If you like A and P, then it's not really hard at all. But some people struggle because there's just a whole bunch of new words. A and P is just filled with new words. Once you get past that, a lot of the stuff is training on what to do. So it's not full of classes where you're just memorizing a bunch of stuff to take tests. Our classes almost all have labs attached to them where we're teaching you how to do stuff. And so there's a lot of hands-on stuff because that's the end goal. This program is to make students, they're a tech when they get done. And so they do over 1,000 hours of clinical time as well. And so that's done at local hospitals. Nearly any big hospital in the area, from mostly in Seattle, but we have like one in Everett, a couple in Tacoma, hospitals that students go to. Interesting.
We're at that 2-minute mark.
2 minutes. Okay, really quick, interesting thing. And this would go for all healthcare thing. So I was in the military, and there's a common thing that happens right before people are getting deployed overseas, that some people all of a sudden get a bunch of medical problems, right? And I was in the military as a neurodiagnostic tech, and I had a patient come in, thought they were having seizures, and they were due to deploy in like 2 or 3 days. And so there's this little voice in the back of my head that's like, yeah, right. You know, like, isn't that convenient that you come down with a medical disorder that will disqualify you from deploying 2 days before your deployment, right? Well, I didn't say anything, right? You know, I'm not going to do that. You know, I got a good bedside manner, I'd hope. And it's hooked her up, started running the test as normal. And what do you know, like 5 minutes in, she has a seizure. And so it was real. And so I tell all my students that, because you never know, you never want to make any assumptions about a patient based on something that makes you biased. And that made me biased. The fact that she was due to deploy in a few days, it made me think she must be faking, right? And not that the bias can come in many forms in healthcare. It can come gender, race, religious stuff. And we have to try really hard not to think about any of that and do our tests the best we can, no matter what we think. All right, it is 4:45 and my time is up. And thank you all for attending. I'm glad to see a bunch of people excited about healthcare.